Types of white blood cells. White blood cells or leukocytes protect us against infections and against diseases. They're produced in the red bone marrow, and they're under the control of different hormones, namely interleukins and colony-stimulating factors. So remember when we were talking about the different kinds of blood cells in a previous part of the chapter, we mentioned that the myeloid and lymphoid stem cells are going to be stimulated by different chemicals to produce our different cells. These different chemicals, in the case of the white blood cells, are interleukins and colony-stimulating factor. Interleukin, if you look at the word, it's divided into inner and leukin. Leukin means leukocytes or white blood cells, and inner means in between. So interleukins are hormones that not only stimulate the bone marrow to produce white blood cells, it's also a way how leukocytes are going to communicate together. And you notice that there's an S, so there's a lot of interleukins. There's interleukin 1 and 2 and so on. We have, again, these colony-stimulating factors that are also plural. So you'll have, in this case, colony-stimulating factor that would stimulate the production of white blood cells. There are 5 different kinds of white blood cells, and they fit onto 2 different categories. If you look under a microscope and you find granules, they're known as granulocytes, where, again, they have granular cytoplasm. Then they have shorter lifespans. Those are neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. If they do not have any granules under a microscope, they are known as agranulocytes. Actually, the fact is that they do have very tiny granules. It's not just that you cannot notice them with a regular light microscope. And those are either your lymphocytes or your monocytes. Neutrophils, these are small, light purple granules when they are stained. So you can see here, this is your neutrophil. You can see that it has these little purple stained granules taking a neutral color, so it's not red or blue. And the very characteristic for neutrophils is that they have these multilobulated nuclei, and it has what is known as a lobed nucleus, about 2 to 5 sections, and they're also known as polymorphonuclear leukocytes, or PMNs. Sometimes you'll find it PMNLs. Again, let's break down the word. So leukocyte, we already know that it means a white blood cell. Polymorphonuclear means the white blood cell with a nucleus that has several shapes. Neutrophils are the first cells to come to an infection. So they are your first responders when it comes to a pathogen trying to get into the body. They are very phagocytic. Okay, so they're strong phagocytes, and they are the majority of your leukocytes. They are also elevated in bacterial infections. So all of these are kind of like buzzwords that you want to keep in mind. So the polymorphonuclear leukocytes, having these multiple lobes or nucleus, they are your first responders. And if they are elevated, that would be due to a bacterial infection. Next are your eosinophils, and they're named that because you can see all of these red granules under a microscope. The nucleus is bilobed, has 2 lobes, and it moderates allergies and parasitic or defending our bodies against parasitic or worm infestations. So if somebody has eosinophilia, which is the increase in the number of eosinophils, that would be either due to an allergic reaction or due to a parasitic infection. Basophils, you'll find that the granules are going to stain blue in color. The granules are full of histamine and heparin, both of which are important in the case of an inflammation. So histamine will dilate the blood vessels, bringing more blood into the infected or into the inflamed area. And heparin is a blood thinner. You don't want blood clots in the area of an inflammation, so that blood can keep on coming in, bringing in with it the white blood cells. Now, monocytes, those are the biggest of your white blood cells. You'll find that the nucleus is kidney-shaped, no granules, so it is an agranulocyte. Inside of the blood vessel, they are named monocytes. When it exits the blood vessels to go into the tissue where the inflammation is actually occurring, it changes into a macrophage. Both cells, monocytes and macrophages, both of them are highly phagocytic cells. They can eat up bacteria or dead cells or debris. And so now we know the cells that are highly phagocytic, they are your monocytes, macrophages, and neutrophils. Tend to know them as M&Ms. Lymphocytes, these are the smallest in size. You'll find a huge nucleus with a very slight rim of cytoplasm surrounding it. Again, it is another agranulocyte. Lymphocytes are of two kinds, either T or B lymphocyte, and these are the cells that are important for long-term immunity. The T cells are more aggressive. These directly attack the pathogens. They also have the ability to attack and damage tumor cells, while your B cells do not attack directly, but they produce antibodies. Okay, so now that we've went through all 5 kinds of your white blood cells, again, you want to be familiar with different things. You want to remember these buzzwords like which one is your first responder, which one has multiple lobes, which one increases in bacterial infection, allergies, and so on. So you want to make sure that you're good with all of these different things. Which one is the biggest of the cells, which one is the smallest of the cells, and so on. Now, what are the functions of your white blood cells? Well, first off, it has a function known as diapedesis. This term right here comes from the word pedal, which means that it can move. So it kind of has these feet-like projections, as you can see here. So in the case of the blood vessel, capillaries have little tiny slits or pores or little tiny holes. During inflammation, the white blood cell is able to squeeze itself through these holes in order to go into the connective tissue or to the interstitial fluid where the inflammation is occurring. So that function is known as diapedesis, meaning in order, again, having these little feet-like projections to squeeze themselves through the capillary pores. Phagocytosis, which is the engulfing and digestion of pathogens. Your highly phagocytic cells are your M&Ms, which are your monocytes, neutrophils, and macrophages. Inflammatory response. And the inflammatory response means it is where you have redness and swelling of the area that is either there's an infection going on or another cause for inflammation, whether it's allergy or whatever the cause is. And again, it is mediated by that heparin and histamine. So remember, histamine is a dilator. It'll dilate the capillaries, leading to more blood coming into the area. The heparin is a blood thinner, and it will prevent blood from clotting in the area. So the inflammatory response is really to restrict the inflammation or the infection to that area and prevent it from spreading to other to the surrounding tissue. Another function of white blood cells is that they have a characteristic known as positive chemotaxis. So if there's an infection or damage in any area of the body, these damaged cells are going to release chemicals. The chemicals that released by these damaged cells are going to attract white blood cells to the area of an infection. Now, so let's take this as an example. You'll find here that this individual has a splinter that in the skin. So you can see that, the layers of the skin and so on should be familiar at this point. That splinter is obviously a foreign object, plus it is also introducing bacteria into the region. It's not a splinter. Bacteria, as soon as it finds blood in dead tissue, it'll start multiplying. That's its favorite medium, really. But there's something else going on the other hand. Okay, so we've damaged the blood vessels. That is going to lead to white blood cells coming to the area because of that bleeding. Now, which cells would be the first white blood cells to come in? If you answer neutrophils, you're correct. So your first responders are your neutrophils. They come in, they start eating up any cellular debris. So the cells that died, it will engulf them through phagocytosis. It'll also start to engulf the bacteria that is trying to invade the body. Other white blood cells are going to bring in your histamine and heparin, and through chemotaxis, the dead cells release these different chemicals in order to attract more white blood cells to the area. So what is the typical white blood cell count? It ranges anywhere from 3,500 to 10,500 per microliter of blood. Leukocytosis, which is the high white blood cell count, higher than that 10,500, that can occur in acute infections, vigorous exercise, great loss of body fluids. So basically, the immune system or your white blood cells has a hard time sometimes figuring out, is there really an infection, or is there just something that is out of the normal going on in the body? So you'll find that sometimes it responds to things that are normal by increasing the white blood cells. So for example, during pregnancy, sometimes you could find leukocytosis. So the white blood cells, even if they perceive that there's a threat, they are going to increase in number just in case that threat ends up being an infection. So you can see here again, vigorous exercise can stimulate the white blood cells to increase in number. Severe dehydration again. So anything that is really perceived as a threat to the body, the white blood cells respond to that by increasing the number. Leukopenia is low white blood cell count, less than 3,500 per microliter. You'll find that leukopenia usually happens in viral infections like flu, measles, mumps, chickenpox, AIDS, polio. Typhoid fever is not a viral infection. It is kind of like an exception. It is in that case, anemia. Okay, if it's, for example, if it's an aplastic anemia where the whole red bone marrow is just damaged, so the red bone marrow won't be making RBCs and it won't be making white blood cells either. So leukopenia will be accompanying that anemia. But the actual number of the total white blood cell count really doesn't give us a lot of information. It just tells us that there is a high number of white blood cells. It is a differential white blood cell count that tells us which cell is higher in number. So you'll find that when you order a blood test, it's usually a blood cell count with diff, which means with a differential white blood cell breakdown. You want to break down the percentages of each of these white blood cells. So it won't give you a number per se, it'll give you a percentage, and that's what you want to look at. So the percentages can change in particular diseases. So for example, we said that neutrophils increase in bacterial infections. So if you get a blood test back with high neutrophils percentages, that means that this individual has a bacterial infection somewhere in the body. Eosinophils, it can increase, leading to eosinophilia. That would be either an allergies or a parasitic worm infection. T lymphocytes, a special kind of lymphocyte, especially the helper T cells, you will find that in HIV infections, the levels are low. Leukemia is a cancer of white blood cells depending on which kind of blood cells have increased. Are they the granulocytes? That would be a myeloid leukemia. Or is it a cancer of the lymphocytes? And that is known as a lymphoid leukemia. Myeloid leukemia, again, the cancer of granulocytes, that's produced in the red bone marrow. While lymphoid leukemia is a cancer of lymphocytes that are produced in the lymph nodes. So when we talk about the immune system, we will talk about how there is this, in order to make lymphocytes, the process is a combination of the bone marrow and the lymph nodes working together. So we'll find that the T lymphocytes, for example, are mature in your lymph nodes, while the B lymphocytes mature within the bone marrow.